Moderating this panel is Ron Painter, one of the most knowledgeable people in the U.S. about how to make this work. He's CEO of the National Association of Workforce Boards. We have an outstanding panel here. The goal was to get a leader involved in this work from each state. And from Colorado, as I mentioned, we have Steffens, the dynamic director of the Colorado Workforce Development Council. She played a key role in building the great Colorado team that's here at the conference. From New Mexico, we have Celina Bussey, the Secretary of the New Mexico Department of Workforce Development. She's been in that job, I think she told me, for 5 years. So she's a real veteran of this work. She helped assemble the New Mexico team. From Utah, we have Benjamin Hart, or Ben Hart, from the governor's office in Utah, assigned to economic development, and he was a leader in forming the Utah team. From Arizona, we have Glenn Hammer, CEO of the Arizona Chamber of Commerce. That's the largest business organization in the state of Arizona. And Glenn is co-leader of the Arizona team, which will be assembling, like all the state teams, later this afternoon. Now, you might wonder why we don't have somebody from Nevada on the panel. The reason is that Carolyn Goodman, the mayor of Las Vegas, was planning to come. She had a last-minute conflict and couldn't be here. She will be here next year. She has made economic development the centerpiece of her new administration, which she was just reelected. And so with that, I'll turn it over to Ron.
All right, thank you very much, Bill. It's a pleasure for me to be here. For those of you who are not aware of the National Association of Workforce Boards, we proudly represent the nation's nearly 550 local business-led workforce investment boards across all 50 states and the territories. Our task at the national office is to provide technical assistance to the boards, to represent the boards in Washington and a lot on the road, and to engage in professional development, working both with the private sector people who are the majority of the boards and helping them understand like what makes a good board, how to do business partnerships, and with the professionals in how they advance. When I first got into this industry, I had advanced to one editorial a week in the newspaper off of the sports section. So I would always go to the sports section first. And then I would try to read one editorial to where my day now starts with, looking at economic forecasts, looking at the Huffington Post, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, in following the economy. To give you some concept of what these folks help represent is, if we were to look at the U.S. labor market for, let's say, March, I'm going to guess that at the end of the month, there were approximately 5.1, 5.2 million hires in the U.S. There were probably about 5 million, somewhere around there, separations. Some of you may think of that as, I don't know how many Pittsburgh Steelers fans we have in the crowd. I certainly know there's a lot of us here. But Chuck Noll used to say they got on with their life's work. And there'd also be about 5 million job vacancies in the U.S. Historically, the U.S. always ends the month with about 4.7, 4.8 million job vacancies. So if you add all that up, what you come up with is a U.S. labor market that has over 100 million transactions a year. So this is not something that you can visit like once a year or twice a year and think that you really know the market. It is that amazingly dynamic. A couple caveats. Normally, we do a thing called Workforce Central, which is radio. So, I'm really uncomfortable. I see the cameras. So, normally people don't have to see me. They can just hear me. So, a little nervous about that. The second thing is, and I'm offering this as a group apology, everything that some of these people think I've said about economic development is not true. I have never said it as viciously as they may say that. No, I'm just kidding. I'm going to ask you guys to open up with just really some brief comments, kind of seat your organization in the grand scheme of things from your home state. So, Glenn, I'm going to ask you to go first because we're on your territory, right?
Welcome. This is
leave a lot of money, right? Leave money.
And leave money, and I want to make it clear we're all Arizona Cardinals fans here. No Steeler fans.
Larry Fitzgerald, a pit crab.
Well, we appreciate the fine education you received there. But I want to thank Bill for putting on this fantastic conference. Just when I think about the way things started off yesterday with Doug Pruitt's very personalized introduction and biographical account of how important this work is, and then to hear Governor Bussey emphasize how important it is to make sure that all of Arizona students have multiple pathways. One of the comments, and I'm paraphrasing, that the governor made really summarizes why I'm here and why the Arizona Chamber of Commerce and Industry is so deeply involved in this work. There is a very clear disconnect with what's going on in the K through 12 system and what's necessary for all of our students to succeed. Yes, our system overall, not just in Arizona, is working for a lot of kids. But when you see dropout rates that, when you see 70, 72, 73% of kids graduating from high school, we all know that that should be 100%. There's absolutely, if we agree on nothing else, that no good is going to come from a student who's not at least graduating from high school. And right behind that, not a lot of good is going to come from a student who's graduating from high school that's not ready for the next step. And when I've been at this work, so on the economic development, I spend the bulk of my time, or have spent the bulk of my time, on the meat and potato things that you would expect a chamber to spend its time on, to make the state competitive in terms of our tax policy, our regulatory policy, our tort reform policy. And I can look at our body of work over the last 5 or 6 years, and we're biased, and I've got to say this, but I would argue Arizona's made as much, if not more, progress than any other state. But one very interesting thing has happened during that time, and this was my greatest surprise during my tenure, is during the teeth of the recession. I mean, the worst economic downturn this country had since the Great Depression. We'd go around our board table, and it's over 100 individuals, companies, large, small, medium, from all over the state, and we would hear this almost across the board. Not completely across the board, but almost across the board. We need qualified workers. We're like, well, how is that possible? This is the greatest economic downturn this country has had. Well, it's possible because there is a disconnect, and we need to, the reason why this work is so important is that we need to fix that, and we need to make sure that kids are graduating from high school and that they have multiple pathways. And when you look specifically, I went to university and I had the great opportunity to go to law school at ASU. But we need to make sure that there are those pathways for all the kids. And when you see some of the graduation rates from CTE programs at 95, 96%, I'm going to say something. I don't really need to see anything else. Something really good is going on. So our job, I'll take it. Thank you. My closing comment is, another reason why we're here is our specialty is you're the experts. We put together what we think is very good policy, and then we lobby to make it happen. So a big reason why I'm here is to make sure that we're taking all of this good work and that we're able to convert this into legislative action that will give all of our students multiple pathways to success.
Thanks, Glenn. This is great. I just realized you guys sat in alphabetical order. This is it's pretty amazing. No wonder, you guys are really organized. I know. You already figured that out. Stephanie Stevens, Colorado. Good morning. We were hanging out yesterday, so it's good morning again. Talk a little bit about where you sit in Colorado's economic development world.
So I am Stephanie Steffens from Colorado, and I am the director of the Colorado Workforce Development Council, which is a governor-appointed, industry-led collaboration of economic development, workforce development, education, and higher education charged with the alignment of our systems to make sure that our talent is meeting the needs of our economy. And so we are charged with that alignment and that work, and our role is really to work with the cabinet members of all of the different agencies and their staff to make sure that there is the top level alignment, but also, as Ellen mentioned in her comments this morning, Colorado doesn't just talk about local control. We don't just talk about the bottom-up process. It's ingrained in the way Colorado does business. So when Governor Hickenlooper came in, we launched the bottom-up economic development strategy, which truly was a process of engaging all 64 counties in the state, rolling that engagement up into 14 economic development regions of the state, and then figuring out what the core objectives of that economic development plan were going to be, one of which is educating and training the workforce of the future. But also there is a connection through all of the other 5 related to talent. We can't grow, attract, and retain businesses without the talent that they need. We can't brand our state as an innovative state and be innovative without creative, innovative people and not only entrepreneurs but intrapreneurs. We need all of those things. And so each of the other objectives have a component to workforce as well. So we engage the process of all of the partners in the council, not only the highest level, but then also division directors and frontline staff of all of the different agencies, and we engaged with our local system partners. So that's really critical. Every one of our systems have local partners and relationships, and so we chose to use, early on into the process, Colorado already had a strong reputation for being one of several states, like Pennsylvania, that helped, which I forgot this part. I am so true of a Bronco fan that even my true colors are orange and blue. There you go. So, but Pittsburgh's my second team. Love Terry Bradshaw. Anyway, now I lost my train of thought. So, we really built that process, and so when we decided to build on the sector strategies that had already been working in states like Colorado and Pennsylvania for a really long time, but it was a workforce thing. I came in, I've been in my job for about 5 years, and I came in and I said, this is really cool. But if it's only focused on a workforce, it's a workforce thing, and you're working to drag businesses to the table and you're trying to keep businesses at the table, you've totally missed the point. And I actually had come from 4 years in our Office of Economic Development and 20 years of owning my own businesses before that, and 20 years before that of working on our family farm and ranch in southern Colorado. So I knew the importance of business, and I knew the importance of economic development. And when I went to our first Sectors Academy and I looked around the room and there were maybe 10 business people there, the only 2 economic development people in the room were my 2 peers I had recently worked with, and I drugged them kicking and screaming to come. I knew there was a problem with the way we were doing it. And so the commitment I made that day is that sector strategies and sector partnerships would not be a thing that we did in Colorado, but it would be the way we did business with business. And that's what we've accomplished over the last 4 years in using the power of the governor through the bottom-up economic development plan, the power of the relationships with our local regions, and really looking at everything from whether or not we're meeting the needs of our economy. Workforce is not something separate from economic development. It is not something to compete with economic development. It is a critical partner and a critical component of economic development. And we have to keep our eye on what industry needs, or we can't serve our businesses and our job seekers. The other part that I can't stress enough, and I'm so excited to be here with all of you and having these great conversations about the middle skills jobs and CTE and vocational training and alternate pathways. I do believe that all pathways are important. As Ellen mentioned, we know in Colorado a traditional pathway works for 23% of our kids. That's not good enough. We know the other 77% are not failures. We also know we can't track them. We have a really hard time finding out where they went and how they got there. And so through our data alignment team, which again is focused on the industry needs and all of the work that the different systems are doing, we are collaborating to build industry data that supports industry-driven career pathways. And we've done a lot of work. We've worked on career pathways, we've worked on sector partnerships, and we've integrated them to where all of our career pathways are industry-driven. And we couldn't have done that without the critical partnership with our community college system, and specifically the CTE side of our community college system, in driving forward that leadership and building on all of the work that they had already done on the career ladders and the work and the relationships between the high schools and the vocational schools and the community colleges. And then on the especially the forced credit side, the articulation agreements between our 2-year community colleges and our 4-year state colleges and universities are critical to our career pathways. And so every bit of that is industry-focused, industry-driven, meeting the needs of our economy, but recognizing that it's not us, it's not the governor, it's not any one system, it's everybody collaborating and working together, and that's how it gets done. And I actually, when people say, well, but what do you do? And I say, well, we convene and we coordinate. And they kind of look at me like, huh? And I say, okay, remember the old commercials, the BASF commercials? We don't make the skateboard, we make the skateboard better. That's what we do. We don't do anything. We make it easier for other people to do what they do better.
And that takes you all day.
Nah, a little.
You know, I have to say this before I move on to Celina. You are so lucky because Ellen broached the subject of cannabis this morning, because that was going to be one of my questions to you about economic drivers. But we took care of that. Celina Bussey from Utah. I'm sorry. What did I say? New Mexico. Sorry. All right.
There we go. All right, technology is not my strong suit, so I can't compete with the likes of Google. Well, following my great counterparts of Arizona and then Colorado, and then we're going to wrap it up with Utah, I'm the state without a professional sports team, so therefore I'm not going to be loyal to any of you because I'm a Green Bay Packers fan. So I went Midwest, as far away from the desert land as I possibly could, but I do that because they're champions, and I do that because they've got a rich history, so go Pack. You know, it's interesting always being able to go after a couple of panelists, because I think we come into it with very positive, enlightening things that we want to say about our state. We're here to be champions of our state and talk about great things. But one of the things that it always causes me to do to reflect upon the fact that we're all trying to turn the Titanic here. For too long, we have talked about economic development in isolation and workforce development in isolation. And I've spent the last day and a half with a lot of you folks, and I've realized that in every room, the educators outnumber the workforce development professionals sort of on the state level, and the economic development professionals by leaps and bounds. You probably are all here in a 20-to-1 ratio. And that tells us something when it comes to the vested interest that the education system has made in recognizing that they have to turn, that their ship has to turn in order to answer to themselves, are we relevant anymore? Is K through 12, is higher education relevant in our state, in our country, in meeting the needs of our students first? By multiple pathways and some of the strategies we've talked about, but then to the end user of our product. And we've talked a lot about that in New Mexico. And it's a tough concept, I think, for sometimes educators and all of us to accept, is we're putting out a product. And that's not a bad thing, because we want to say that our product is relevant, that it means something in the place that it's going to go. And the lives of young people that we're touching every single day, the lives of the adults that we're touching in New Mexico and across the country, have to be relevant in the places that they're ultimately going to end up. So I think it's just highlighted that we're all trying to turn the Titanic here, but there's absolutely a vested interest in how to do that and how to do that well. I've spent the last 5 years in the workforce agency in our state fighting for a seat at the table with economic development. And the reason being is that as a state like New Mexico has always seen themselves as, what do we have to do through regulatory reform? What do we have to do through tax reform to make ourselves competitive with the likes of Utah, with the likes of Texas, because their numbers are so staggering in comparison to ours. One of the last states to go into the downturn, one of the last states to come out. And sometimes we get bogged down by that, and we think that all of our emphasis has got to be on those aspects of economic development. But the reality is even when we address those through very significant changes that have happened in our regulatory and our tax environment over the last several years under our governor's leadership, we also have to answer the fact that we are no different than Arizona. When their Chamber of Commerce sits down, like our Chamber of Commerce sits down, and you go around that giant round table of the likes of the Intels to the mom and pop shops, and they will all tell you hands down, human capital is our greatest challenge. Yes, we might have infrastructure issues. Yes, we might lack some capital investment. Yes, we might lack all those things. But really where rubber meets the road is, what does human capital look like today? What is human capital going to look like over the next 5 to 10 years? That is the biggest economic development stress that most often the economic development professionals can't answer. So they desperately look around the room and they say, where are the community colleges? Where's K through 12? Where's our workforce system? That's their problem to solve. But we can't be there after the fact. So 5 years of fighting for a seat at the table purely means that you can't have those conversations in isolation anymore. I think that there's so many governor's offices across the state that have recognized that, purely because it's not just about multiple pathways for our young people, it's that our economies have taken multiple pathways. Jobs don't look like they used to. Education doesn't look like it used to. The workforce doesn't look like it used to. So if we're not all sitting there in alignment and in a collective effort to address those significant changes, we're going to go down like the Titanic went down, unfortunately. And I think that we're all attempting to do just that through these kind of conversations and forums, the bottom-up approaches to economic development and what those blueprints look like in our state. It's never easy. Any one of those issues is met with a great uphill battle. I've got great friends in the education department in New Mexico, and the strife and the struggles of purely trying to have the conversation around a floundering education system and the desperate need for reform in it is monumental. And we're just starting to scratch the surface in that, much less than bringing that into the realm of economic development. So they're two different languages, they're two different operations completely, but we're ultimately all trying to accomplish the same goal, which is to be relevant to the economies that we're trying to build.
Very well said. That was...
Ben Hart, Utah.
Yeah, I'm ready to go work in New Mexico. That was great.
We'll take you anytime.
We got some energy. I think that's fantastic. I mean, I think with the other panelists who clearly very well understand economic development, in the past 2 days certainly have made me excited about what we're doing here in the Southwest. We often hear about other regions of the country. I think the Southwest really needs to become the next big player and the next big thing in terms of workforce development. And it's conferences like this, Bill, that will get us there. So thank you for your good efforts. And so let me just start off giving you some of the data that I think defines the state of Utah. This is one of our key data points, and that is 3.4%. That's our unemployment rate. And so that's the economic environment that we live in, 4.0% job growth. More than twice the national average. It's incredible. And so we love to put up our rankings. I mean, Forbes, 4 out of the last 5 years, has ranked Utah the best state to do business in. And so we've been very aggressive when it comes to trying to develop and cultivate the right business environment for our businesses to flourish. And so my scope and where I fit into the grand scheme of things is I do economic development all day, every day. And so I am fully scoped with economic development within our office. And so my counterpart handles all the recruitment and incentives. I handle all of the grow our own type programs, and workforce falls within my purview. And so we've got our Department of Workforce Services, obviously the cabinet level position that's very active as well. What we hear more and more, anecdotally, because at 3.4%, you're going to feel and you're going to see those pain points. You're going to see the pressure, and it's going to manifest itself. And so looking over the data anecdotally as well, hearing from our businesses, we see two very clear areas where there's need for better workforce alignment and just quite frankly, need for more workers. So if you have any workers in your state, please send them to Utah. We would love to have them. And so some of the things that we're doing, we've got a tremendous career pathway system developed within our State Office of Education. We've got our STEM Action Center, which is a $30 million investment by the state legislator and also significant investment from businesses as well. But we also see programs such as our Utah Cluster Acceleration Partnership, which is all about capacity building. It's designed to allow economic development higher education and our workforce services to come together and actually divvy out funds. And that's what I want to focus on, because I think, for just a minute to close my remarks, but I think when we talk about what we're doing in the state, at the end of the day, what we're doing, I agree with Celina, it's not so different from what the other states are doing. But one thing we've tried to do that I'm hoping will pay dividends, and I think it will and already has, is we have to go beyond convening. And WIOA certainly takes a step in the right direction for convening, but we can't just get around the table and talk about what we need to do. We've got to see actions, and we've got to have outcomes from initiatives. And so one thing we've tried to do in the state of Utah is what's known as our Cluster Acceleration Partnership. And we've actually, a triumvirate of those three agencies, come together and actually fund money to regional partnerships that are led by K-12, vocational, higher educational, and industry partnerships, and they actually pay out money to help develop programs, whether there's equipment, curriculum, whatever it might be that's needed. And ultimately, it's been very successful. 31 new programs developed to date. They just closed another round of funding. Over 60 applications were received, and this is $3.25 million. And so, very similar to what we heard they're trying to establish in Nevada, but it's something that we've seen great results with and great outcomes with. And so I think we're very well aligned in Utah. I think I've heard some things from Colorado and from New Mexico and Arizona and Nevada that I think give us opportunity to cause and to think. But at the end of the day, if we're getting better, then that means our whole region's getting better. And we see this all the time. Companies who come into our state and we're competing against other states, well, when they recognize that the Southwest part of the United States is head and shoulders above the rest of the country when it comes to workforce development, which I think we're becoming, then we're going to the rising tide will float all boats in the Southwest, and I truly believe that. So great conference, excited to be part of this panel as well.
Here's what we're going to do. I have some questions because that's why they put me up here, because I'm supposed to ask questions. But you all have the opportunity. I can't imagine there are not people out there, because I know some of you, who have questions on your mind. So if you don't know Jan Bray is sitting down here in front, and I'm going to ask her to kind of scan and make sure, because sometimes I miss your hands. But I'm going to start off asking a couple questions, and I'm going to charge you all with thinking up a couple questions. So here's my first question. Like, I hang out with you guys from economic development. You know, I have throughout my career. Not that I understand what you all do. So if we, as we have done for the last couple of days in workforce, and you know, we really see a kinship with education, as we hang out together and sip wine, we also whine. As we know what some of the issues are in our world. But I wanna ask you guys. You talked a little bit about workforce development, but what are some of the other issues that are driving economic development today? This isn't 40 years ago when it was y'all come. I mean, what's driving what you've got to look at today? I mean, we'll just come right back down the row if you want to.
Yeah, no, I think that works just fine. So some of the things that we see driving economic development, I had a chance to be in Pittsburgh a couple of weeks ago, National Governors Association meetings.
You guys picked the panel.
You know, and I've got to say, too, I was at NAWB a few months ago, and I saw Ron get into an argument on the stage about whether it's INO or WIOA. I've never seen anyone argue with themselves about the name of a federal program. I think that might be a first, Ron, but it was impressive. So some of the things that we're focused on in economic development, when I was in Pittsburgh, I got a chance to see Tech Shop, Makerspace, business incubation. That's definitely something we're focused on, and that comes back to partnerships with the universities. We've got 5, and this may not mean anything to anybody in the room, but we've got 5 tech startups that are to hit their billion-dollar valuation, and so dollar for deal, literally in the state of Utah, in the past few years, we're outpacing Silicon Valley. And so we've got an incredible emerging tech scene in the state of Utah. The director of our UTC, Utah Tech Council, is here as well, Rich Nelson, vitally concerned about workforce and what we need to do to help solve that issue. But business startup is definitely one of those key things. When we're recruiting businesses, more and more of them, and it's mind-boggling, but more and more of them are saying, we want to get involved with K-12 education. That's a hot spot right now. More and more businesses want to get engaged, and so we're developing a very innovative partnership program that is not so dissimilar from some of the European countries that we see with some of our aerospace companies. and we're excited for some of the prospects that it could lead to. And so there's a lot of things that are on our plate in terms of economic development. We also see our federal programs such as PTAC MEP is a hot topic right now in the state of Utah as well, manufacturing extension partnership. And we're seeing commerce and DOL come a little bit more closely together. They're inching together like awkward people at a dance. And it's good to see that because they need to break down their silos just like everybody else does. And so that's been positive to see as well. But those are some of the hot topics in Utah. So
I always equate them to disgruntled spouses still living in the same house. But nonetheless, I believe it was Utah actually yesterday on a panel that was talking about the rise and growth of entrepreneurial business startups at the high school level. And I think that a lot of what I've gained out of the last day and a half is that everything that we've been doing has just had to be backed up. Things that used to be able to happen in higher education are now having to happen in K through 12. An emphasis on career exploration, job readiness, etc., used to be reserved for about to graduate college, about to graduate high school. Now let's talk about it. And we now have to start talking with our first and second graders about it because the world is about jobs. The world is about work. And a lot of yesterday's opening comments were about where did our country stop valuing work? And somewhere along the way, I think we did. We didn't mean to. It was a mistake. But we're trying to get back to that because we all realize that as individuals, as a society, that is where we get our self-worth. It's from the work that we do in the lives that we touch. So hearing what Utah was doing around grasping that concept and looking at how do you take high school students, how do you take 14, 15, 16-year-olds and talk to them about a business plan and talk to them about financial literacy and talk to them about where they'll take their cool ideas in robotics competitions and turn it into a business startup. And I think in the global economy that we live in the fact that so many people will work virtually and may work virtually their entire life, it's the concept of solo work. New Mexico may never get the Teslas of the world, and I pick on Nevada because they're not at the table and they stole them from us. We may never get the Teslas of the world. We're fighting desperately to keep Intel in our state. So without those companies and the reality that over 85% of all of the businesses in my state have less than 10 employees, I have to start talking to young people. Economic developers have to be engaged with young people about what it would be like to engage in solo work and market your services and sell your services to the business that you work for that happens to be located in Pittsburgh and you're in Albuquerque, because all of those boundaries have come down. So I think everything around entrepreneurship has shifted, and it just is causing us to rewind and have those type of dynamic conversations around business awareness and all of that in an economic development realm, but within the educational concept and spectrum. As early as high school, and who knows, we might be sitting down with elementary school kids and asking them, what problem do you want to solve? That was sort of how we opened up yesterday morning, and I love that. What problem do you want to solve? Chances are there's a business that you could start to solve that problem. So it's a little bit of the perspective that I have about what we're having to do just earlier and earlier.
Thoughts? You want to offer some thoughts? You don't have to.
I never have any thoughts, Ron. Yeah. So really thinking about, the economic what's driving the economy in Colorado, we really spent the first 4 years of Governor Hickenlooper's administration growing out of the recession and focused on attracting jobs. And our Office of Economic Development did a fantastic job of really growing Colorado out of the recession. And now we have the opportunity to say, okay, now what? And that now what is a combination of, really looking at, how do we create jobs that will take people to the middle class. So we, as Ellen mentioned, we have our Colorado Talent Pipeline report that identified what a top job is. So that those are the jobs that pay at least a living wage for a family of 3. And they're growing, and if we invest in those occupations, they're going to grow over the next 10 years. So looking at the regions of the state of Colorado and the differences in those regions, some regions have the low unemployment rate. We have some regions that have hundreds of jobs going unfilled every day because they literally do not have the workforce for those jobs. But then we still have other communities that still have a relatively high unemployment rate and are struggling with, they were already struggling from the recession. The recent oil and gas drops again are really hitting some of our communities. And so looking at how do we embrace entrepreneurship in Colorado, 40% of new jobs created every year, almost, it's not exactly 40, but nearly 40% of new jobs created in Colorado every year are created by companies that have less than 100 employees. And most of them are companies that have less than 50 employees. So what we refer to as second stage companies are huge in Colorado. And these are the small guys that are so busy running their company, they don't have time to even look up and see what resources and things are available to help them. So really focusing on, partnerships with our small business development centers and our minority and woman-owned business offices and the resources that are available to help grow small businesses and to keep those small businesses being successful, I think are critical. Branding, not only branding the state, but branding the different regions of the state and really looking at our rural regions and what's different and unique about them and how can they be successful. We have Durango, Colorado is its own little crazy economic development mecca that is just driving entrepreneurship like crazy, and looking at that and saying, if Durango can do it, how can we take that same concept and help some of the other rural areas of the state do that? And really looking at smart investments, smart innovation, smart capital. A lot of those entrepreneurs aren't excited about signing over their companies to a venture capitalist, but there's angel investments and there's so many other types of investments that as the government entity responsible for economic development, our Office of Economic Development is really looking at how we can be more innovative in those capital investments and how we can support entrepreneurship and small businesses to grow better, and really looking at, our Front Range is booming, they're doing great, there's always room for improvement, but a really strong focus over the next few years on our rural communities and the struggles that they're still having because many of them haven't come out of the recession yet.
I'll focus. I'm not going to get into tax, tort, and regulatory reform policy, although all those are important. But the reason we're all here is on the educational front and is closing the skills gap. A few points. I'm just going to sort of go. I don't know if pyramid's the right word, but when I look at the overall educational system in this state, we have an outstanding public education system. And I know you had the chance to hear from some of our leaders, such as Dr. Crow and Chancellor Glasper. We have outstanding community colleges. You will hear a tremendous amount of praise. If you boom mic'd our boardroom, a lot of satisfaction there. We have some of the best CTE and JTED programs. Anyone who's been to, I think the governor mentioned a couple of times, EVIT. Holy cow, if I were there as a kid, I probably wouldn't be here. I think I'd be a chef. It's absolutely unbelievable what they're doing. And again, you look at those graduation rates, everything right is going on. And our job is simple. We have the easy part here on the policy side, just make sure they're properly funded so they can continue. That's the easy part. We have some of the best public schools in the country, if not the world. You take a look at some of the charter networks, BASIS, which is mentioned in Amanda Ripley's book, the Great Hearts Network. And then we have some outstanding traditional public school systems, the Mesa Public School System, Chandler, Gilbert, Scottsdale. There are incredible pockets of excellence, and it does add up. I mean, we can say to a company coming here, and we did this, by the way. I mean, I'm a New York native. I spent 10 years in D.C., and then moved back here about 10 or 11 years ago. And I'll tell you, the last check before we moved back was to make sure that we could find outstanding public school education for our girls. But it's not, unfortunately, an opportunity available to all kids. And our job is to make sure those dots are connected. A couple of quick points on there. Again, we've got to make sure what's working is expanding and replicating. And I believe with this, with our new governor, Governor Bussey, that is a focus. You know, we're not going to spend our time, just like if we were looking at businesses, we're not terribly interested in the least effective businesses in your respective states and to study what they've done wrong. We'd be most interested in what's going right. And that's really the focus when you take a look at what's going on educationally here. My final point, and this is something that is, I look at CT as almost, they're built-in internships. The kids are learning skills. They're connected to real businesses. It is probably one of the most, if not the most valuable thing that you can give to a student is to connect them with an employer in an area that they're interested in. Again, just speaking personally, if it wasn't a teacher in high school that said, hey, you have an interest in politics, you ever thought about interning for a local member of Congress? Okay, that sounds like a good idea. Making that connection is important. And I know the University of Arizona now is engaging in an aggressive program to make sure all the students going through there have an internship. My final point is, a lot of great schools. I will take someone with an internship in the field that's connected to us over someone with a 4.0 from Harvard, any day of the week. Now, if they have both, it's a slam dunk. But that practical work experience is very, very important.
Let me go real far afield and then come back. Gallup does polling around the world. 161 countries, tens of thousands of people. The #1 issue among people around the world is a good job. More than 30 hours a week, enough money to have their family self-sufficient. That translates into a missed opportunity between those full-time jobs and the number of people hunting them at about 50% unemployment around the world, looking for, quote, good jobs. How does, because from a national perspective, we look a lot at what's happening in India and Brazil and China and Canada and other places, Europe, that are investing heavily. What kind of pressures do you guys experience on the economic development side from companies that are here or companies that are thinking about here relative to what they're getting, what they're experiencing in the rest of the world? Is that a factor when you're talking to the companies here? Because you're not just competing against each other. I mean, it's everywhere that there's the ability to free trade.
Anyone from the United States Congress or the administration here? Because I'll tell you, no. Because here you have 4 states represented, 3 of which have Republican governors, 1 of which a Democratic governor. We're all working very hard on every angle, all the different, including education, including tax, regulatory reform, to make our states more competitive. What I hear from a number of the companies where there is that opportunity to go outside of the country. I'll give a few policies, and this will get a little bit uncomfortable for some, but that's all right. A higher minimum wage. Well, it sounds great. I make more than the minimum wage right now. My first job, I was the assistant bun guy at Burger King. We need, and I was grossly overpaid at about 10 cents over. Believe me, if you saw the way I dressed initially and the haircut I had at that point, you'd understand what I'm saying. We have to honor work, and it scares the heck out of me. Every time that minimum wage goes up, you are cutting off opportunities for kids. Because I'm telling you right now, if it goes to 15 bucks, I'm not going to have interns. It's not worth it. It's just not worth it. That's 1. 2, on DC, our corporate tax code is an absolute mess. It's a disaster, and it costs us a lot of jobs. Having the highest effective tax rate in the world is a bad thing for the country. And the final sort of global point is trade is good. Free trade agreements are good. You look at, for example, Mexico. It's a huge advantage that they could sell a car there for $1,000 less than the United States because of all of their free trade agreements. So we need to do our part in our states, and we're doing it, but we all also have to collectively make sure that what's going on in D.C. isn't harming our efforts.
I think you said, 1, is it a reality? I don't think there's any doubt that in our minds, a good job is important to us. Even if we have one today, we may not have one tomorrow. So I think there's no one that's going to argue that that's the absolute truth. Is it a truth that we are suffering from a greater skills gap than we probably ever even realize in this nation? Absolutely. I run the unemployment insurance program in my agency as well. So on top of all the fun workforce issues and fighting for a seat with economic development, I get to deal with when the entire pipeline has failed, I have a population of folks who need us. That population in my state is probably greater than it ever has been before. Regardless of what the unemployment figure is, we are left with those without the skills and aptitude to obtain the good job that we so desperately want, that are chronically underemployed and unemployed, and look to the state and look to the system to continuously support them. Those systems are strained. Those stresses are there. And when the economic developers come, when the site selectors come and they look at all of your indicators, they look at your regulatory policy and your tax policy and they score you. Are you a right-to-work state? Are you not? What does your graduation look like? All of those things. And they ultimately end up in a place and they say, so what is out there in a potential workforce for me? And states like mine have had to challenge that, and there's been a couple of folks that have spoke about that, is how do we challenge the norm by which those companies evaluate the workforce that we had? If we say that the typical credentials that site selectors used to look at, the typical indicators like graduation rates and college completion rates and things like that, if those can be challenged and we can talk about the skills and aptitude that our workforce has in a different way, does it keep us at the table? Will we not get crossed off the list because of some of those other factors? So we've had to get very creative because that pipeline is going to take a long time. That ship is going to take a long time to turn, to see graduation rates goes up, to see college attainment rates go up. But even then, that may not be enough. We heard a lot yesterday about where are our BA students? Well, some of them are still waiting tables, the same way they were when they were pursuing the BA degree. So it's not just an end-all, be-all for the credential. Education has to be relevant and meaningful, and we've got to answer that question. And then I think we say, yes, the good job is the most important thing. The minimum wage argument solves itself because we're building the pipelining capacity to get the jobs that they want. And then the site selectors I can go back to and say, well, forget about all those other indicators. Here are the true skills that my workforce has, and it's why New Mexico should stay at the table in consideration.
Yeah, just Ron, to your question, do we hear about international competition when we're dealing with our local companies? Absolutely. If we don't think things like the wage rate in China have a tremendous impact on our economy, then we don't know what we're talking about, because it does. And so we've been able to bring a lot of those jobs back to our communities over the past probably 5 to 6 years as some of the economic factors have changed globally. But it means that we have to stay more competitive. Manufacturing is something that's constantly talked about, but I worry about IT as well. I mean, those are jobs that very easily could be lost to overseas competition. And so when we get into, hey, are we trying to get our K-12 kids ready for their careers and for college, we have to realize not every kid is going to college. And with all due respect to Glenn, if we can get our kids working at a machine shop or a manufacturing shop instead of Burger King, how much better for them is that? Honeywell yesterday was talking about, you know, these kids that come to work, they get a full-time job, they get a decent wage, they get full-time benefits. I mean, how much better is that for economy? I'd much rather outsource the Burger King jobs than my aerospace jobs. I'm not sure that's likely, but that's definitely the market we're playing in. So.
And I would say ditto, ditto, ditto. What I would add is I think that as things are changing, what we're hearing from businesses is they don't want to outsource. They don't want to go overseas. They want to bring more of the jobs back. But if we're not supplying them with the workforce that they need, that has the competencies that they need, and more important than that, providing opportunities for partnership with them to develop the solutions together, then they have no other choice but to look somewhere else for their workforce. And so one of the things, I mean, we have our Advanced Manufacturing Trade Association from Colorado with us on this trip. We have our Colorado Technology Association with us on this trip. We're working really closely with them on initiatives like STEM and on a new program we're going to roll out, BASIC, that Ellen mentioned, that Noel's going to be chairing for the governor. And the reality is, Noel knows in his business every day he has jobs that he cannot fill. Lots of jobs that he can't fill. Well, he's not sitting back and pointing fingers, and he's like many of the businesses that are in our states. They're not sitting back and pointing fingers and saying, why isn't education doing this for me? Why aren't the colleges? The tide has changed. Businesses want to be at the table. They want to work together. They want to provide work experiences. Our government systems have to figure out how to welcome that help and how to use that help and how to not make it too hard for the businesses to be there to help. And so I think that, you know, engaging your trade associations and all of the different state level associations, your local partners, chambers of commerce and trade associations are critical. And it's not going to a business and saying, okay, what do you need? Okay, I think I understood what you said. I'm going to go back in my own little silo and figure out how to solve it. And then after I have it all figured out and I've invested tons of money and energy and time, I'm going to come ask you if I produced what you wanted. That's not... Yeah, exactly. And oh, here's the stack of paperwork you have to fill out to get 3 internships paid for. No, that doesn't work. And that's really the big thing, and it's why you have to work with businesses. You know, I love the stories that we heard at the schools and from the kids. I will bet that every one of those programs that are successful because they have a business partner helping give those kids real experiences. And to me, that's the difference we have to make to compete globally. It's the only way we can compete globally.
So I got to do this. I got to push back just a tad. Now, how many in the room also joined Glenn at having worked at fast food or retail? Keep your hands. Now, how many of you are still there? How many of you learned lessons? Were those lessons about teamwork? Were they about showing up on time? Were they about being responsible for what you were responsible for? See, I think as workforce development, and I'm not gonna comment about economic because I don't know, but I think sometimes in workforce development, we forget about everywhere I go, hospitality and the service industry, if they are not the largest number of jobs in a region, they're right up there. And I think sometimes in workforce development, we're a little snobby because we forget the lessons we learned. And I'll use a very personal story. My son is a palliative care RN in Seattle. He feels like his experience at having worked at Gap and at Banana Republic as he was going through college make him a better RN. He is more attuned to what's going on with his patient because he learned customer service skills. I think we got to figure out a way to hand you guys a way to describe our work in working to see that our service industry has a high standard of what it means to deal with customers and listen and be on time and do the kinds of things that build basic work skills. I'm going to apologize for that editorial, but I just think I want all of us to think about that. Because nationally I get a lot of criticism about, you know, a very large company that's made a very large investment. And you know what? I look at that and say, congratulations. There are a lot of big companies that have not taken the step and said, because we are big, we can do something. So I think we need to pause in criticism and reflect on partners that we already have in the community whom we can engage in this work. I'm going to ask you real quick if you have like 20 seconds of closing thoughts, something that you would like to leave with workforce development to think about the next time they sit down with economic development.
Thank you for all being here, and let's all work to connect the disconnect.
I think just remembering the speaker this morning that said, if you act like you're not welcome, you'll be treated like you're not welcome. Don't act like economic development doesn't welcome you to the table. Don't act like you're not an equal partner. Put yourself out there as an equal and a partner, and you will be treated as an equal partner.
No one can do it alone. The education system can't do it. Economic development can't do it. No governor, no cabinet secretary, no one can do it on their own. It will take every single one of us getting out of our silos, stop talking in our acronyms, and stop worrying about what our fiefdom is that we think that we're in charge of, because the reality is we're all not in charge of anything. We're ultimately trying to better the lives of the people that we touch every single day. If we can do that, we win.
Well said, all across the board. I think it's, if there were one thing I would say to workforce development, I just came from I was a director at our state workforce agency. I would say know what your tools are and know what you really bring to the table. Don't try and be something that you're not. Do what you do really well, and that will be of benefit to economic development.
Cool. Ben Hart from Utah, Celina Bussey from New Mexico, Stephanie Stevens from Colorado, and Glenn Hammer from Arizona. Thank you for joining us this morning. Appreciate it.